DeShawn Carter's name was never supposed to be called. Not at the school assembly, not after what they accused him of. But when the principal handed him the mic, the room froze. This was the same student they tried to suspend for being too smart. Now he was about to reveal a secret the school board had buried for years. And he had the receipts. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. In the heart of suburban Pennsylvania, nestled among manicured lawns and cul-de-sacs that seemed too perfect to be real, stood Glenridge High School, a rust-colored institution of old brick, strict traditions, and even stricter expectations. For decades it had been the kind of place where excellence was praised, but only when it wore a familiar face. No one ever said it aloud, but everyone understood. The gifted students looked a certain way, came from certain neighborhoods, and made everyone else feel comfortable. Room 304 was the crown jewel of the math department, Ms. Rollins' advanced calculus class. Known for its rigor and for breaking the spirits of even the most ambitious juniors, it was where futures were quietly sculpted. The top 5 students, all of whom had known each other since middle school, were locked in an academic arms race. They competed for every grade, every nod of approval, and every chance to shine. So when DeShawn Carter walked into room 304 late on a Tuesday morning, everything changed, not dramatically, not with fanfare, but with the kind of subtle ripple that rewrites an entire tide. He didn't come in loud or confident. He wasn't the kind of new student who made introductions or tried to make friends. Tall, with thoughtful eyes and a navy blue hoodie, zipped all the way up, DeShawn barely made eye contact. He handed a transfer slip to Ms. Rollins and took the empty desk in the back corner, without saying a word. Most students barely looked up. A couple of them exchanged brief, silent glances, not hostile, just curious. He wasn't familiar, and he wasn't white. That made him interesting in the way people find something out of place in a perfectly set table. Ms. Rollins didn't linger on him either. She resumed the lesson, pointing again to the same unsolved problem on the whiteboard that had stumped the class for over a week. A web of limits and irrational expressions, the equation loomed like a ghost, daring someone, anyone, to slay it. No one moved. Then DeShawn's hand went up. At first she didn't even notice. She was facing the board mid-sentence, scribbling a line of numbers. When she turned around, her face registered surprise more than anything. "Yes, DeShawn, is it?" He nodded. "The function. I think there's a factorization issue in the denominator. That's why the limit keeps diverging." The class tensed. It wasn't just what he said. It was how confidently he said it. Like he wasn't guessing. Ms. Rollins raised an eyebrow. "Would you like to try it on the board?" He stood, walked to the front with slow, deliberate steps, and picked up the dry erase marker like he'd done it 100 times. With neat precision he rewrote the function, cross-cancelled terms, and simplified it down, not just solving the problem, but solving why it had been so hard in the first place. It took him 3 minutes. When he turned around, the room was quiet in a way that didn't feel right. Ms. Rollins gave a polite nod. "Very interesting." He went back to his seat. No one spoke. No one congratulated him. In fact, a few students leaned closer to each other, whispering beneath their breath. That moment, more than the math, planted something ugly. Over the next few days, the pattern continued. Pop quizzes? DeShawn finished first. Always. In-class problems? He solved them faster than anyone, often spotting shortcuts that even Ms. Rollins hadn't considered. He didn't gloat. He didn't even smile. It was as if math was the only place he knew how to speak. But instead of earning respect, he earned suspicion. How's he getting every question right? He never even studies with us. He's always by himself. Did you see how he just knew that theorem? It didn't take long for the whispers to evolve. He's gotta be cheating. Probably has something in his hoodie. Bet he memorized the answers before he got here. DeShawn wasn't oblivious. He felt it. The stares, the sudden silences when he entered the room, the way Ms. Rollins began hovering near his desk when she handed out tests. But he said nothing. He just kept working, head down, answers correct. The final push came during a Thursday morning quiz. DeShawn finished first again. Ms. Rollins watched him walk to the front, place his paper gently on her desk, and return to his seat. Her expression tightened. That afternoon, as the class emptied out and backpacks zipped shut, Ms. Rollins reached into her drawer to retrieve her planner, and found something unexpected. A piece of folded notebook paper. No name. She opened it slowly. He has to be cheating. Check his desk. She stared at the note for a long time, reading it twice. Then she glanced at DeShawn, who was still gathering his things. He moved slowly, unaware. She looked at the handwriting. Blocky, anxious, anonymous. But something in her paused. Why would someone lie? Why would multiple perfect quizzes from a student with no prior history of academic accolades not raise concerns? The rational part of her wanted to dismiss it. But the other part, the quieter, deeper part she didn't often listen to, whispered, "What if?" She stood and walked over, heels clicking against the tile. "DeShawn," she said quietly, "do you mind staying after class for a moment?" He looked up, startled, but nodded. The room cleared. The chatter faded. The hallway lockers clanged shut. And then when they were alone, she folded her arms and offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I need to ask you something," she said gently. "It's standard protocol. Would you mind opening your backpack for me?" DeShawn froze, not because he had something to hide, but because he'd seen this play out before. Every emotion, disbelief, humiliation, a flicker of hurt, crossed his face in an instant. But he said nothing. He slowly unzipped his backpack and held it open. Inside, a textbook, a calculator, a half-eaten granola bar, his spiral notebook, and a pencil case. Nothing more. Ms. Rollins stared, then cleared her throat. "Thanks, that'll be all," she said, already turning away, as if erasing the moment would make it less real. But for DeShawn, something had already broken. That evening, as he reached for his notebook to finish his homework, DeShawn found something else slipped inside, another anonymous note. This one scribbled in haste. "They'll never believe a black kid's that smart. Know your place." The next morning, Glenridge High felt different, colder somehow. As if the walls themselves knew a secret and were whispering about it. Word had traveled faster than logic. By the time DeShawn reached his locker, eyes were already following him. Conversations stopped when he passed. Backpacks turned away. Laughter that had nothing to do with him suddenly fell silent the moment he looked up. No one said the word cheating out loud, but it floated through the air like invisible smoke, acrid and thick. DeShawn tried to push through the day, but everything felt off. Miss Rollins couldn't meet his gaze during class. When he answered questions, she responded with polite nods but no longer called on him first. The students who once came to him for help with equations now avoided sitting next to him. A few exchanged smirks when he walked in. The message was clear. Something about him had changed, or rather their perception of him had. During lunch, as he sat alone near the vending machine, he overheard a table of juniors whispering, "I heard they caught him using a phone during the quiz." "No, my sister said they found notes under his desk." Miss Rollins said he was too good to be true. Each rumor contradicted the last, yet every version ended the same way. DeShawn was guilty, not because there was proof, but because the idea of his brilliance didn't fit their understanding of how the world worked. By fifth period, the whisper became procedure. A voice came over the intercom. "DeShawn Carter, please report to the assistant principal's office." Every head turned. A few grins broke out. The sound of his chair scraping back felt deafening. Mr. Lanning's office was lined with student achievement photos, smiling faces, mostly white, with medals and trophies. He gestured for DeShawn to sit. "DeShawn," he began, his tone overly practiced. "You've made quite an impression here at Glenridge in a very short time." DeShawn sat still. "Is this about the quiz?" Mr. Lanning folded his hands. "We've had concerns raised by staff and students. Given the nature of these allegations, we're required to investigate. This isn't personal." "It feels personal," DeShawn said quietly. Lanning smiled, the kind of smile that wasn't meant to comfort but to manage. "I understand how it looks, but protocol is protocol. Until we complete the review, we'll have to place you on academic suspension from all honors-level coursework." DeShawn blinked. "You're removing me from class? Without proof?" "It's not punishment. It's precaution." His voice stayed calm, but his eyes carried the look of someone who had already decided. Lanning slid a form across the desk. "Sign here," just acknowledging the temporary reassignment. DeShawn didn't touch the paper. "My mom's gonna want to see this." "Of course," Lanning replied, already closing the folder as though the conversation was over. When Dr. DeShawn Carter arrived that afternoon, she came like a storm. The glass door of the administration building swung open, and every secretary froze mid-keystroke. A chemical engineer with decades of experience at DuPont, Yvonne carried herself with the authority of someone used to being heard. Her white lab coat had been replaced by a navy suit, her ID badge still clipped to her belt. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "Where is Mr. Lanning?" He stepped out of his office mid-sentence, caught between words and excuses. "Mrs. Carter." "Dr. Carter," she corrected, her tone sharp enough to slice air. "You pulled my son from his honors classes. Explain." Lanning gestured toward the conference room. "Let's sit down. I think we can resolve this civilly." "There's nothing civil about accusing a child of cheating because he's smarter than you expected him to be." The receptionist pretended to type. The tension hummed like electricity. Inside the small room, Yvonne sat straight-backed, arms crossed. "Show me the evidence." Lanning hesitated. "We don't have evidence per se, but there were irregularities reported by staff." "Staff," she repeated slowly. "Or one teacher." Ms. Rollins raised valid concerns. "Because my son solved problems your other students couldn't?" Lanning sighed. "Look, Dr. Carter, I understand your frustration, but when performance drastically changes in such a short time, you think excellence is suspicious when it comes from my son." She cut in. "Let's call it what it is." He flinched slightly. "This has nothing to do with race. Everything about this has to do with race." For a long moment, neither spoke. The clock ticked on the wall, sharp and rhythmic. Finally, Lanning looked down at the table. "We'll open a formal review. 1 week. He'll remain on academic hold until then." Yvonne leaned forward. "And when the review finds nothing, then he'll be reinstated." She stood, collecting her purse. "You'll hear from our lawyer before you hear from me again." That evening, the Carter's house, normally quiet and filled with soft jazz, echoed with tension. DeShawn sat at the dining table, staring at a half-eaten plate of spaghetti. His mother paced nearby, phone in hand, drafting an email to the school district's equity board. "I'm not letting them ruin your name, baby," she said. "Not when you've worked this hard." DeShawn didn't look up. "They already did." Her fingers froze mid-type. "They all look at me like I'm something dirty," he said. "Even the teachers. Like I fooled them. I didn't cheat, Mom. You know that, right?" She went to him, cupped his face. "Of course I do. The truth will come out." But even as she said it, her voice trembled, because she'd lived long enough to know that truth alone rarely won. By Friday, DeShawn's world had shrunk. He wasn't allowed in advanced classes, so he sat in study hall, isolated. Students he once tutored walked past without acknowledgement. The whispers had turned into laughter. A boy from his old math class passed him a folded note during lunch. For a moment, DeShawn hesitated to open it, afraid of what it might say. Inside, in shaky handwriting, were just 3 words. "They set you up." He looked around, trying to find the sender, but the cafeteria was too crowded, too loud. Set him up how? He didn't know it yet, but someone had already gone further than anonymous rumors. A series of screenshots had been shared in a private group chat, supposed evidence that DeShawn had been using a secret answer key. The images were doctored, crudely edited, but convincing enough for those who wanted to believe. By the end of the day, half the school had seen them. When DeShawn got home that evening, his mother was waiting with a letter from the district. She opened it carefully, her face pale. It was an official notice. A public hearing has been scheduled to review the allegations of academic misconduct involving student DeShawn Carter. Public. DeShawn felt his stomach drop. "They're making this a show," he said. Yvonne clenched the paper so tightly it crumpled. "They think they can humiliate you into silence." He looked at her, eyes full of something beyond anger, something like quiet resolve. "Then I'll make them listen." The following Monday, the announcement went out over the school's loudspeaker. A public hearing regarding student DeShawn Carter will take place next week, open to all parents and media. Students gasped. Teachers froze. And in the back of the classroom, DeShawn sat still while his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Don't show up. You don't know what they're planning." The night before the hearing, the Carter house barely slept. The faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound between them, filling the space where words used to live. DeShawn sat at the dining table, books stacked in neat piles before him, trophies of a mind too disciplined to quit. Across from him, his mother sat surrounded by documents spread across the polished wood. Report cards, standardized test results, science fair medals, even old recommendation letters sealed in plastic sleeves. It wasn't just preparation. It was armor. Yvonne Carter was no stranger to bias. As one of the few black women to lead a chemical engineering division at DuPont, she'd learned early that credentials were her shield, But tonight that same armor felt thin, because she wasn't fighting for herself. She was fighting for her son. "Mom," DeShawn finally said, breaking the silence. "What if they don't believe you?" She looked up, her eyes sharp but tired. "Then they'll have to answer to someone who will." Her laptop chimed with a new email, a notice confirming that the hearing would be open to parents, faculty, and press. The district had made it public to ensure transparency, but everyone knew what it really was: a spectacle. Outside, rain tapped gently against the window pane. Inside, the storm brewed quieter, in the places where hope and anger coexist. The next morning, Glenridge High transformed. The auditorium, usually reserved for student assemblies and talent shows, had been rearranged into something more formal, more severe. A long table at the front, 5 school board members seated like judges. The district superintendent in the center. Rows of folding chairs packed with teachers, parents, and curious students. The smell of coffee and anticipation filled the air. When the Carters walked in, the room turned, subtly but unmistakably. Conversations hushed. Phones lifted discreetly to take photos. DeShawn walked beside his mother, dressed in a crisp white shirt and black slacks. He didn't look like a boy accused of cheating. He looked like someone holding back a storm. Yvonne carried a brown portfolio tucked under her arm. Her heels clicked against the floor, deliberate, rhythmic, defiant. Every sound reminded the room she had come prepared. At the front of the auditorium, Ms. Rollins sat with folded hands, avoiding DeShawn's gaze. Her face looked pale, drawn, as if she'd aged overnight. But the quiet around her wasn't guilt. It was discomfort. The kind that comes from realizing that perception might have done the work of accusation. "Mrs. Carter," the superintendent began, "thank you for joining us. This hearing is to review the allegations brought forth regarding your son's academic integrity. Please understand, this is a fact-finding process, not a trial." "Then treat it like one," Yvonne said flatly, laying her portfolio on the table. "Because that's exactly what this is." The superintendent cleared his throat, shifting uneasily. "Let's proceed." The first speaker was Ms. Rollins. She stood, hands clasped tightly, voice steady but uncertain. "I've been teaching advanced calculus for 16 years, she began, and while I don't question DeShawn's effort, his sudden mastery of advanced concepts not typically taught at this level, raised legitimate concerns. Concerns, Yvonne repeated, under her breath. Ms. Rollins continued, "I have no evidence of misconduct, but I felt it was necessary to report the irregularity to maintain fairness among students." The board members nodded slowly, pens scratching across yellow notepads. One of the white parents in the front row whispered, "She's just doing her job." Another murmured, "Makes sense. You can't let kids cheat their way to the top." DeShawn sat motionless, staring at the floor. The words slipped through the cracks of his composure, stinging quietly. He had imagined this moment differently. Maybe someone would speak for him. Maybe logic would prevail. But reason had already been replaced by suspicion. When it was their turn, Yvonne rose, unfolding a neatly organized binder. "My son's aptitude didn't appear overnight," she began. "Here are his past standardized test scores, all in the 99th percentile for mathematics. Here's his middle school recommendation from Mr. Bennett, who called him one of the most promising analytical minds I've ever seen. Here are competition records, academic trophies, and IQ test results, all verifiable." She placed each document on the table with deliberate calm. "This is not a case of cheating. It's a case of discomfort. The discomfort that comes when a young black boy exceeds expectations built to contain him." The superintendent shifted in his seat. A few murmurs rippled through the audience. Yvonne continued, her voice unwavering. "You didn't question his answers because they were wrong. You questioned them because they were right. Too right. Too fast. Too confident for what you believe a boy like him should be capable of." Ms. Rollins looked down, her throat tightening. The room grew heavy with silence. Then, unexpectedly, a man in a gray cardigan stood from the third row. His hair was salt and pepper, his eyes soft but determined. "I'm Mr. Bennett," he announced. "I taught DeShawn in 8th grade. Everything Mrs. Carter said is true. I saw the same brilliance in him years ago. He was solving college-level problems before high school. This isn't new." His words echoed through the auditorium, cutting through the stillness. The superintendent frowned. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett. But we need to maintain order." "No," Bennett interrupted, his voice rising. "You don't need order. You need fairness." For a brief moment, The air shifted. A flicker of hope, fragile but visible. DeShawn looked up, eyes meeting Bennett's. The older man gave a small nod, a silent reassurance that not everyone in this room had forgotten how to see truth. But that flicker didn't last. A board member leaned toward the mic. "We appreciate your input, Mr. Bennett. But this hearing concerns procedure, not personal testimonials. In other words, sit down." He did, reluctantly, shoulders slumping, as the system swallowed his defense whole. As the hearing stretched on, the pattern became clear. Every time Yvonne spoke, the board countered with phrases like protocol and precedent. Every piece of evidence she presented was met with polite nods and hollow thanks. Facts bowed under the weight of fear. Fear of being accused of racism. Fear of admitting that bias had guided their judgment. The tension was suffocating. DeShawn sat quietly beside his mother, eyes drifting to the window where rain streaked the glass. Each drop felt like time slipping away, each one a reminder that no matter how many proofs he solved, he was still fighting an equation he couldn't balance. Then, midway through the proceedings, something unexpected happened. A man in the audience, one of the local reporters, stood and asked, "If there's no proof of cheating, why is this being discussed publicly at all?" The superintendent blinked. This is not a media Q&A session. But the question had landed. Parents shifted uncomfortably. A murmur spread, because deep down, everyone knew the answer. The rumor had become more valuable than the truth. 2 hours later, the superintendent called for deliberation. The Carters waited in a small conference room down the hall. Yvonne's hands trembled as she poured herself a cup of water, the paper cup crinkling in her grip. DeShawn sat with his backpack at his feet, eyes hollow. "Maybe this isn't about math anymore," he said softly. She looked at him. "What do you mean?" "It's about reminding me where I belong." Her heart cracked quietly in her chest. For the first time, she didn't have a counter-argument. When the board reconvened, their expressions told the story before their words did. The superintendent cleared his throat. "After reviewing the testimony and documentation, the board has decided to suspend DeShawn Carter from all academic competitions and honors recognition for the remainder of the school year. His record will remain under review." The auditorium filled with murmurs, some surprised, most indifferent. Yvonne stood slowly. "You're punishing excellence because it came in the wrong color." No one responded. She gathered her files, her voice low but sharp enough to cut glass. "History will remember this moment, not for what you proved, but for what you refused to see." DeShawn rose beside her, silent, the weight of the verdict pressing into his chest like an iron brand. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled. The world outside that room was already shaping the story before the truth had time to breathe. As they reached the exit, a young student slipped a note into DeShawn's hand, folded tight, like a secret. He opened it just before stepping out into the rain. "They weren't trying to fail you. They were trying to warn others what happens when you don't stay in your lane." DeShawn looked back at the glowing lights of the auditorium, realizing this wasn't the end of a fight. It was only the beginning. The shame didn't leave. It traveled home with DeShawn, sat at the dinner table with him, shadowed him through hallways where students no longer looked him in the eye. He had been silenced publicly, but inside the fire refused to die. Glenridge may have clipped his wings, but they hadn't taken his mind. The night after the hearing, while his mother reviewed appeal procedures and emailed civil rights attorneys, DeShawn stared at his notebook. Pages of half-solved integrals, proof sketches, and equations layered in margin notes. The math still made sense, even when the world didn't. Something inside him snapped, not in anger, in clarity. He cleared a corner of his desk, grabbed his phone, and propped it against a stack of textbooks. No lighting rig, no ring light, just the dull glow of a desk lamp and a spiral-bound notebook. He flipped to a clean page and titled it, "Why Partial Derivatives Matter. For Real." Then, in a calm voice, stripped of rage, full of quiet confidence, DeShawn began explaining. He used metaphors from basketball and music. He connected math to everyday logic, drawing invisible lines between theory and life. His handwriting was fast but legible, his tone warm but precise. He didn't say his name. He didn't mention Glenridge. Just a handle at the bottom of the screen. A Blackboard Whiz. The first video got 9. The second. He didn't stop. Each night, another post, handwritten notes, chalkboard-style voiceovers, tricks for solving complex equations in intuitive ways. He avoided the camera, showing only his hands. It became his nightly ritual. No fame chase. No audience expectation. Just him, reclaiming a piece of what had been taken. Then came video. A 3-minute breakdown of differential equations using water bottle volume as an analogy. Clean. Precise. Unexpectedly elegant. It caught the attention of someone miles away. Dr. Elijah Greaves, a tenured Princeton mathematics professor, known for his brutal entrance exams and viral rants about how math education is broken. He watched DeShawn's video at 2 a.m. on a bored scroll. By 2:06 he was sitting upright, replaying it. At 2:11, he retweeted the video with one line. "Who is this kid?" The explosion was instant. By sunrise, the post had racked up over 600,000 views. STEM blogs began resharing. Reddit threads dissected the method. One user wrote, "This is the clearest explanation I've seen since grad school." Another added, "MIT should hire him yesterday." By that afternoon, Blackboard Whiz was trending. Within 48 hours, his follower count passed 200. But DeShawn didn't flinch. He didn't reveal his name. No selfie. No link in bio. Just more math. Raw. Real. Relentless. Each new post garnered thousands of comments. Some were filled with awe. "I wish I had this in high school. This guy is the reason I passed my midterm." But others carried familiar venom. "No way this is real. This has to be a team of people pretending to be one person. Bet he's copying from someone else and just reading it." Different platform. Same doubt. But now, DeShawn had distance. Online, he was untouchable. A ghost with a chalkboard and a voice too smooth to ignore. At school, no one knew. He kept his head down, walked quieter than before. He was still suspended from competitions, still barred from honors classes. Miss Rollins passed him in the hallway without acknowledgement. Teachers looked away. Students snickered. And yet, every night, he built a kingdom behind the screen, one equation at a time. Then came the email. A verified account, stemfrontiers.org, a leading national science initiative. They wanted an interview. They offered a grant. They wanted to know who he was. DeShawn never replied. He didn't trust the world enough yet. The fame was unintentional. The recognition bittersweet. It wasn't justice. It wasn't Glenridge apologizing. It wasn't the truth being reinstated in the very system that condemned him. But it was something. Even his mother noticed. "Your mood's changing," she said one night over dinner, noticing the lighter rhythm in his footsteps. He smiled faintly, shook his head. Still not enough. She didn't ask why. She didn't need to. One morning, a few weeks into his secret success, the day started like any other. Third period. Study hall. He sat near the window, solving problems from a college textbook he borrowed online. The room was quiet, the air stale, just the rustle of backpacks and the drone of fluorescent lights overhead. Then came the voice. "Yo, that's your voice on TikTok, right?" DeShawn froze. He turned slowly to see Jamal Peters, a junior known more for skipping class than attending it, leaning across the aisle with a smirk. "You the Blackboard Whiz, right?" Jamal whispered louder, now gaining the attention of a few nearby students. DeShawn's heart skipped. "I don't know what you're talking about," he muttered. But Jamal was already pulling out his phone, scrolling, tapping through the familiar thumbnails.
"That's your notebook. Same lines. Same voice."
"Dude, I swear that's you." Others looked over. One girl across the room leaned in. "Wait, you're the math guy?" More heads turned. DeShawn's breath tightened. He'd never imagined being recognized. Not here. Not by people who once laughed when he raised his hand. But the moment didn't turn warm. It turned sharp. "You lied about getting banned," someone muttered. "He used us to get famous," another said. The narrative began to flip, not into praise, but resentment. Because now that they knew it was him, they couldn't let him be brilliant anonymously. Now he was a threat again. By the time lunch arrived, his account had been posted to the school's unofficial Instagram meme page. Comments flooded in. So he was cheating. Just found a way to make money off it. Guess he needs clout more than honesty. Another fraud hiding behind the internet. He refreshed the page over and over. His face never shone. His name never said. But they knew. And now, they would twist his talent into arrogance. That night, his comment section shifted. Accusations replaced admiration. "You're the Glenridge kid who cheated, huh? All this math and no morals." He considered deleting the account. His hand hovered over the deactivate button. But then, a DM came through. From a verified Princeton account. "We know who you are. And we believe in you. Let's talk. But just as he screenshotted the message, another DM arrived, this one anonymous, filled with screenshots of his house from outside, followed by a chilling line. Smart won't protect you when the world knows where you sleep. The message shook him. The words glowed on his phone screen, long after the battery should have died. Smart won't protect you when the world knows where you sleep. It wasn't a threat in theory. It was personal. Someone knew where he lived. For the first time, DeShawn felt fear crawl beneath his skin. He closed his curtains that night, slept with the light on. Every sound outside felt amplified. The crunch of leaves, a passing car, the faint click of a branch against the window pane. By morning he had made a decision. He wouldn't delete his TikTok, not out of defiance but survival. It was his proof, his version of truth. The world could distort him, but it couldn't erase his math. His mind was his last defense. He didn't know that by sunrise, his digital identity had already been dragged into something uglier than rumor. The school found out officially the next day, not through his confession, but through the chaos. Someone had forwarded screenshots of his account to the Glenridge Parent Network on Facebook, a virtual town hall where politeness was a performance and gossip was gospel. Within hours it spread. So this is the boy who embarrassed our school on social media. Imagine breaking the rules just to show off. They were right. He's addicted to attention. Each comment landed like a pebble thrown into a pond, rippling outward until the whole town buzzed. The posts weren't about his intelligence anymore. They were about tone, audacity, respect. The idea of a suspended black student teaching calculus to millions online, without permission, without their approval, offended something in them they couldn't quite name. By lunch period, the whispers had turned back into stares. When DeShawn entered the cafeteria, conversations dimmed, as if the air had thickened. Someone laughed too loud from the far end of the table. Another whispered, "TikTok genius." The sarcasm stung harder than their laughter. He sat alone again, the way he used to before his name became both curse and headline. That afternoon he was summoned to the principal's office. Principal Rivera wasn't an unkind man, but he was a cautious one, too aware of the district's politics to take risks. He gestured for DeShawn to sit. His desk was covered in printouts of TikTok screenshots, comments, even an article headline from the Glenridge Post. Suspended student runs unauthorized online tutoring account. Rivera sighed. DeShawn, you're a talented young man. But this, he gestured toward the papers. This is drawing the wrong kind of attention. DeShawn stared at the printouts. The wrong kind of attention? For teaching math? It's not about the content. It's about representation. The videos are being associated with the school. People think we endorsed it. So? DeShawn asked quietly. Rivera hesitated. So the superintendent wants them taken down. Permanently. DeShawn leaned back, disbelieving. You're asking me to stop doing what you accused me of lying about being good at. Rivera didn't answer immediately. He rubbed his temple. I'm asking you to help us de-escalate this situation. By disappearing. Rivera looked down, guilt flickering across his face. I'm sorry, DeShawn. My hands are tied. For the first time, DeShawn realized the full truth. No apology was ever coming. The school didn't want to fix what they'd broken. They just wanted silence. But silence was already impossible. The national press had found him. By midweek, his face, or rather his voice and notebook, were everywhere. CNN Education ran a feature titled "Anonymous Math Prodigy Inspires Millions." STEM podcasts replayed clips of his tutorials. A journalist from The Atlantic even called him the voice of a new generation of thinkers. He didn't say a word to anyone about it. He didn't have to. Because at the same time, local news spun their own story. Local student defies school policy for TikTok fame. The same people who once praised Glenridge's commitment to excellence were now quoting anonymous parents calling him a distraction, a bad example, a dangerous precedent. DeShawn watched both headlines appear side by side on Google. One celebrated him, the other dismantled him. It was surreal, like living in two universes at once. Yvonne tried to hold the house together, but even she couldn't escape the noise. At work, colleagues asked questions in hushed tones. Isn't your son the one from the video? One coworker asked. The one causing all that controversy? Controversy? Yvonne repeated. He's teaching math. The coworker smiled thinly. That's one way to put it. That night, Yvonne sat in the living room, eyes locked on her laptop screen, reading the superintendent's statement aloud. While we applaud intellectual curiosity, Unauthorized academic activity under the school's name misrepresents the district's educational mission. We do not condone self-promotion or unsanctioned tutoring platforms. DeShawn stood by the stairs, listening quietly. They make it sound like I'm selling drugs, he said, his voice shaking. She closed the laptop. They're scared of what they can't control. He looked at her, the faintest flicker of frustration beneath the exhaustion. Then maybe I'll give them something they can't control. She wanted to tell him to stop, to protect himself, but she saw it in his eyes, the same fire that had once burned in her when she walked into male-dominated labs and proved she belonged. She didn't stop him. That weekend he posted again, his boldest video yet. No equations, no lessons, just his voice over a blank screen. I was accused of cheating for being too good at math, so I started teaching it instead. If that's a problem, maybe the problem isn't me. The video hit 3 million views in 24 hours. The internet chose sides. Half called him a genius, a hero. The other half labeled him arrogant, ungrateful, a race card opportunist. Comment sections turned into war zones. Hashtags multiplied. Let him teach trended on Twitter. But so did rules are rules. He scrolled through the chaos in silence. Each post was a mirror reflecting the country's split personality. Admiration and prejudice twisted together, until even praise felt poisoned. Then, one night, while reviewing new messages, something unexpected happened. A notification appeared from an unfamiliar address, National Math Open, @prizeboard.org. The subject line read, Formal Invitation, the National Mathematics Open Competition. He clicked it, skeptical at first, but it was real. Verified links, credentials, the competition televised, nationally recognized, audited by university boards, was the most prestigious math event in the country. The message continued, We've followed your recent work online, and believe your talent deserves a stage free from bias. You've been selected for a direct invitation to this year's competition. Your school's recommendation is not required. He reread that line 3 times. Not required. It was the first door that opened because of who he was, not despite it. He ran downstairs, clutching his phone. Mom, you need to see this. Yvonne looked up from her laptop, tired eyes softening as she read the email. This is real? It's real, he said, smiling for the first time in weeks. They want me. She exhaled, half in disbelief, half in pride. Then we'll make sure they never forget your name. For a brief, fragile moment, the house filled with something it hadn't held in months. Hope. But just as he set his phone down, another message appeared. This one from a Glenridge High email address. DeShawn Carter is not authorized to represent Glenridge in any public or academic event. Participation will result in expulsion. The light in his eyes dimmed again, as the same institution that doubted his mind now tried to own his silence. The email sat on DeShawn's screen like a heartbeat he could see but couldn't trust. The National Mathematics Open, televised, monitored, audited, the most elite math competition in the country, had invited him. No school recommendation, no gatekeepers, just recognition, pure and unfiltered. For a full minute DeShawn didn't move. His reflection in the monitor looked unreal. A boy whose world had been turned upside down, now staring at the one door that might let him walk free again. He read the line that mattered most for the 10th time. Your school's authorization is not required. It felt like justice whispered through code. But behind that flicker of hope came the echo of the previous email, the one from Glenridge High. Participation will result in expulsion. 2 truths clashed on his screen, opportunity and punishment. That evening, Yvonne sat at the kitchen table, the letter printed out beside her tea. The lamplight caught the edges of her face, tired but burning with something fierce. They can't stop you, she said, though her voice trembled slightly. You're not representing Glenridge, you're representing yourself. DeShawn frowned. They'll still find a way to twist it. They already did, she replied. Steady now. Let them see what happens when their narrative collapses. He studied her, his mother, the same woman who had faced down superiors who once called her too assertive for demanding credit on her own work. She'd fought her battles quietly, but now for him she was ready to fight loud. Then we do it our way, DeShawn said. She nodded once, a pact sealed between them. The next morning, the email leaked. No one knew who did it. Maybe someone in the district, maybe a parent who had access to the superintendent's inbox. But by 10 a.m., Twitter had it, Reddit had it, TikTok had it, Screenshots of the district's threat to expel a student for competing in math went viral. The backlash was immediate. Hashtags flared to life like sparks in a dry forest. Let DeShawn compete. Math is not a crime. Glenridge bias. Within hours, major education pages and civil rights accounts picked up the story. One tweet from an academic influencer read, "Imagine punishing a black student for being too good at math. America, do better." Then came the celebrities. A retired NBA player, who ran a STEM foundation, retweeted it with, "This kid reminds me of me. They doubted me too. Let him shine." A Harvard astrophysicist wrote a blog post calling DeShawn the kind of brilliance we kill before it ever gets a chance to live. News outlets swarmed. Cameras showed up outside the Carter house. A CNN producer left a business card wedged in the front door. Yvonne tried to keep her son shielded from it all. But the world had already chosen its story. A boy silenced by prejudice, now standing on the edge of redemption. Inside Glenridge High, however, the tone was different. The superintendent's office went into damage control mode. In emergency meetings, district lawyers advised restraint, but the local board members seethed. "He's undermining the authority of the school system," one said. "We can't reward insubordination." Another added, "The optics are bad, but if we back down, every student will think they can defy procedure." The principal, Rivera, sat silent through it all. He didn't disagree with them. Not entirely, but somewhere inside, a guilt he couldn't name gnawed at him. When he left that meeting, he passed DeShawn in the hallway. Camera crews waiting outside the school doors, classmates whispering in corners. Rivera stopped. "DeShawn," he said quietly, "whatever happens next, be careful. They'll smile in your face while sharpening the knife." DeShawn met his eyes. "That's why I'm bringing my own armor." He didn't mean a weapon. He meant the truth. 3 days later, the National Mathematics Open issued a statement. "The integrity of this competition is protected by full transparency, live monitoring, independent judges, and on-air validation. There will be no room for bias or speculation. We welcome Mr. Carter." It was the kind of message the district couldn't fight. The moment it went public, their threats fell apart. Yvonne received a call that evening from the superintendent himself. "Mrs. Carter," he began, his tone suddenly honeyed. "After careful review, we've decided not to interfere with DeShawn's participation. We wish him success." Her lips curled in a half smile. "You mean after the internet dragged you into behaving like decent human beings?" He didn't respond. The line went dead. The following week moved like a blur. Reporters called daily. News vans lined the street outside their small brick house. Neighbors watched from porches as DeShawn left for school. Some waved politely. Others didn't. Glenridge's students were divided. Half proud, half resentful. "Guess he's famous now," one boy muttered in class.
"Bet he's loving it,"
said another. DeShawn ignored them all. But not everyone sneered. A small group, students who'd always sat at the margins like he once did, started stopping by his locker. A Latina sophomore handed him a note that said, "You make it easier for the rest of us to try." He kept that one folded in his pocket. The day before the competition, Yvonne helped him pack. She ironed his shirt, double-checked his calculator batteries, and slipped a folded photo into his bag. A snapshot of him at 12 years old, holding his first trophy. "Why this one?" he asked. "Because that's when you smiled without fear," she said. He didn't know how to reply, so he hugged her instead. That night, as he tried to sleep, he replayed every moment since this all began. Every stare, every accusation, every time his intelligence had been mistaken for deceit. Tomorrow there would be no whispers, no anonymous notes, no unseen bias behind grading pen. The entire nation would watch him solve equations live, every move recorded. There'd be no question of cheating this time, only proof. But what he didn't know was that proof, even when undeniable, isn't always enough to keep hate quiet. The morning of the competition dawned crisp and pale. The campus of the National Mathematics Open buzzed with cameras, journalists, and the hum of high-stakes tension. Students from across the country milled about, wearing polished badges and expensive watches. DeShawn arrived with Yvonne, both of them dwarfed by the spectacle, the bright banners, the media tents, the way people stared just a beat too long before pretending not to. "You okay?" she asked, as they approached registration. "I will be," he said, "once it starts." He handed his forms to a coordinator who smiled thinly, eyes darting to his name tag. "Ah, the famous one," she said. It wasn't a compliment. He took his badge in silence. He reached his locker backstage, one assigned to each contestant for their personal items. It was old metal, painted blue, numbered 14. He turned the combination slowly. The door creaked open. Then his stomach dropped. Inside, his calculator lay in pieces. Shattered, screen cracked, buttons ripped off. Someone had done it deliberately. His hands trembled as he picked up the fragments. A small note lay beside it, written in pencil on torn graph paper. "You won't need this if you're really a genius." He stared at it, the words vibrating like static in his chest. Around him, the other contestants laughed, chatting in easy circles. He was alone again. Same feeling. Different room. He took a deep breath, gathered the broken pieces and dropped them into the trash. "Fine," he whispered to himself. "Then I'll do it from memory." The loudspeaker crackled overhead. "Contestants, please report to the stage. The cameras are live in 5. And somewhere in the audience, a familiar face from Glenridge took a seat. One that shouldn't have been there. Broadcast lights blazed down like interrogation lamps. The stage was polished, stark, and unforgiving, a modern coliseum built for intellectual combat. DeShawn Carter stood in the spotlight, the weight of thousands of eyes pressing down from the auditorium seats and beyond, through cameras feeding the broadcast to a national audience. 5 finalists. 1 winner. Each competitor stood behind identical podiums, their names etched in neat silver lettering, but only one name carried the storm with it. Carter, DeShawn. The room didn't whisper it, but the silence around his presence roared louder than applause. He'd walked onto that stage without a calculator. The memory of the broken device in his locker still pulsed behind his eyes like a bruise that hadn't yet faded. But he didn't need it. Not today. He came with something older, something forged through years of rejection, coded doubt, and whispered suspicion. He came with clarity. The buzzer sounded. Round 1 began. Each problem appeared on the giant LED screen above their heads, a countdown clock ticking mercilessly below. Contestants scribbled furiously. The pressure cracked knuckles and sent glances darting across the room. DeShawn moved like still water, calm, contained, but unstoppable. His handwriting was precise, his logic unflinching. The first question, a multivariable limits problem, took him 20 seconds. He submitted, moved on. Round after round followed. Time devoured the others. Erasers flew. Hands trembled. Eyes darted. But not DeShawn. He solved vector transformations, without hesitation. Crushed trigonometric puzzles, like they were high school warm-ups. His mind flowed, not like a machine, but like music, jazz under pressure, improvised but never out of control. Judge Halburn glanced at his tablet, then back up. His expression stayed composed, but his eyes narrowed slightly each time DeShawn submitted a perfect answer ahead of everyone else. The other contestants started to notice too. Elliot Chang, a tech prodigy from Silicon Valley, muttered under his breath as DeShawn submitted round 4 with time still on the clock. "That can't be real." DeShawn didn't hear it. Or maybe he did, and just didn't care anymore. The questions got harder. The room got colder. The air tighter. Round 5 featured a third-order differential equation, combined with matrix substitution, the kind of problem meant to slow anyone down. DeShawn didn't flinch. He tilted his head, blinked once, and began to write. He didn't panic, didn't second-guess, just broke the problem down line by line, translating complex symbols into strategy. 60 seconds in, he hit submit. Perfect. The commentator from the live stream, a Stanford professor known for his biting commentary, took a long pause before saying, "I've never seen anything like this. It's like the boy sees through the numbers." But behind the judges' table, the murmurs began. Judge Halburn leaned toward his fellow panelists. One whispered something, eyes fixed on DeShawn's sheet. Another nodded reluctantly. It happened during round 6. A problem involving an obscure number theory pattern flashed across the screen. DeShawn scanned it, began to write, then felt the air shift. Judge Halburn rose from his chair. "Pause the clock," he said. The room froze. Even the sound of pens stopped. DeShawn looked up. "Mr. Carter," Halburn said, voice controlled but sharp, "please step aside with me." Confused murmurs filled the room. The cameras turned. Commentators went silent. DeShawn stood still for a heartbeat, then nodded once and followed the judge off stage. The other contestants exchanged glances. Some smug, some concerned. Yvonne stood from her seat, in the audience, body tense, hands clenched. She didn't know what was happening, but every cell in her body screamed, it wasn't right. Backstage, just out of view, Halburn turned to him. Your answers have been correct, he began. But your speed, it's statistically improbable, especially given your lack of formal preparation. DeShawn stared at him. You're accusing me again. I'm asking you to explain your method, Halburn replied. Right now, for problems. Explain it or what? DeShawn asked. You strip my points? Say I don't belong again? Halburn didn't answer. He didn't need to. DeShawn stepped back onto the stage. He didn't wait for permission. He walked straight to the freestanding whiteboard, picked up the marker, and said, for everyone to hear, here's how I saw it. The auditorium hushed. Camera lenses zoomed in. And then he began. Line by line, he recreated the entire process. Not rehearsed, but alive. He showed not just how he solved it, but how he thought he narrated the turns, the substitutions, the pattern recognition. He did it not as a student defending himself, but as a mathematician sharing a vision. By the time he capped the marker and stepped back, there was nothing left to doubt. Even Judge Halburn had to nod. Proceed, he said, clearing his throat. DeShawn returned to his podium. His hands were steady, his eyes sharper than ever. Round 7 resumed. He didn't miss a step. And when the scores were announced, his name towered above the others. First place. No tie, no controversy, just excellence. The room erupted. But as the confetti fell and DeShawn accepted his award, something in his expression stayed distant, as if he knew even this moment would come with a cost. Just as the cameras cut away and the judges shook hands, Judge Halburn approached DeShawn once more, this time with a sheet of paper in his hand and a question that turned the whole room cold. DeShawn, are you familiar with the term algorithmic ghostwriting? The word algorithmic ghostwriting echoed through DeShawn's mind like a riddle with sharp edges. He stood under the harsh stage lights, his body still from the outside, but his heart pacing like a hunted animal. Judge Halburn held a single sheet of paper, not with accusation, but with something far more dangerous, suspicion disguised as inquiry. It's a concept used in advanced academic circles, Halburn said evenly. Machine learning platforms that generate solutions based on user input. Instant problem solving without real comprehension. The implication was unspoken, but deafening. DeShawn didn't blink. I don't use AI. I am the algorithm. The statement hung in the air. Not a boast, but a fact carved from fury and exhaustion. The judge studied him, then folded the paper neatly and placed it back into his portfolio. I just needed to hear you say it, he said. And then, as quickly as the confrontation began, it was over. The final round began minutes later, and with it the most brutal problem of the day, a nested third-order integral with unconventional limits, a kind of mathematical labyrinth built to break even the best. Cameras zoomed in on each contestant as the question appeared. Time ticked down. DeShawn stared at the board. He didn't flinch. He didn't reach for any device. His calculator was long gone, broken back at Glenridge. He closed his eyes for 2 seconds, took a breath that came from somewhere deep inside his chest, and began. His pen moved quickly, but not carelessly. Each stroke was deliberate. His process wasn't just about arriving at the answer. It was about clarity, elegance, and transparency. As he worked, the commentators spoke in hushed awe. No shortcuts. He's not skipping steps. He's writing it live. Every detail, every transformation. He's not solving it. He's teaching it. The other contestants scrambled. Some erased. One panicked. Another ran out of time. But DeShawn's expression never cracked. As the final second blinked red on the timer, he boxed his answer with calm finality. Perfect. The crowd didn't react immediately, almost afraid to believe what they'd seen. Then, slowly, applause rose like a wave. The judges exchanged glances. A standing ovation began. Cautious, but growing. Judge Halburn stood last. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat into the mic. Mr. Carter, he said slowly, I retract my earlier inquiry. Your logic was flawless. Then, for the first time that day, he offered something unexpected. I apologize. A pause. The crowd gasped softly. Even the other judges turned toward him. Halburn was not known for backtracking, much less humbling himself. DeShawn didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply nodded once and stepped back from the board. For him, it wasn't about validation anymore. It was about release. After the scores were tallied, DeShawn stood at the top. First place, DeShawn Carter. The headline flashed across the screens in the auditorium, and moments later, across every STEM newsfeed nationwide. But even as the celebration erupted, DeShawn's face remained unreadable. The pressure hadn't evaporated. It had simply changed shape, because he knew this victory, like everything else in his life, wouldn't be allowed to stand quietly. In the back of the auditorium, DeShawn Carter stood amidst the cheering crowd, her palms trembling slightly around her phone. She hadn't recorded the moment. She didn't need to. It was already seared into her memory. Her boy, the one they doubted, investigated, and cornered, had just outperformed the nation's best with nothing but his mind. As the audience began to thin and contestants trickled off stage, a woman in a sleek gray suit approached Yvonne with purpose. Her heels clicked with confidence, her expression unreadable. "Dr. Carter?" she asked. Yvonne nodded, still dazed. The woman extended an envelope, crisp and ivory-colored, embossed with the seal of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. "My name is Elise Truitt. I'm with MIT Talent Relations. We've been watching your son's progress for months. This is for him." Yvonne took the envelope carefully. "What is it?" "A formal pre-admission packet. The most elite offer we can extend. Full ride, guaranteed research placement, mentorship, and a direct pipeline into our theoretical mathematics division." She paused, eyes gleaming. "Your son isn't just brilliant. He's transformative." Yvonne swallowed hard, the weight of years behind her eyes. But before she could respond, her phone buzzed in her purse. A new notification from Glenridge High. Her fingers moved automatically. She opened it. Subject: immediate disciplinary review. DeShawn Carter. Charge: misrepresentation of academic status. Scheduled hearing: Monday. She stared at the screen, stunned. The timing wasn't coincidence. It was control. They were already trying to rewrite his story again. DeShawn walked over seconds later, his trophy tucked under one arm. She handed him the envelope. He smiled for the first time that day. Wide, bright, unburdened. Then she handed him her phone. His smile faded as he read the message. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. They both understood. As DeShawn turned to leave the arena, a voice from behind him called out softly, "Hey, Carter." He turned. It was one of the other finalists, the runner-up. He hesitated, then added, "They're not going to stop, not until you make them." Then he slipped something into DeShawn's hand. A folded note, on it in small, blocky letters. "You need to make this bigger. Don't just win, burn their rulebook." The MIT envelope sat untouched on the dining table, its seal broken but the decision still unmade. Its contents had already been read, reread and whispered through sleepless nights like a prayer too powerful to fully believe. A full scholarship, direct entry into their summer genius program, access to research facilities typically reserved for postgraduates. But one line changed everything. Enrollment contingent upon immediate withdrawal from current academic institution and full-time relocation to MIT's Prep Academy. It wasn't just an offer. It was a key, but it came with a door that had to be closed first. DeShawn stood at the kitchen counter, staring into a glass of orange juice he hadn't touched in an hour. Yvonne leaned against the fridge, arms crossed, the unopened MIT packet in her hand again like it might speak if held long enough. "You'd have to leave by next week," she said quietly. "New state, new system, new life." He nodded, slowly. "That's what I want." "You're 16, she said. 16. You haven't even gone to prom." "I don't want a prom," he said. "I want to breathe." Her jaw clenched at that, not because he was wrong, but because he was so painfully right. The next morning, DeShawn's name was already trending online again. MIT's pre-college recruitment account had posted a cryptic teaser, "Sometimes the future finds you early." Official announcement coming soon. Everyone knew who it was about. The image was just a red envelope on a desk, but DeShawn's handwriting peeked out from the corner of a notebook in the shot, enough to light the match. STEM communities cheered. News blogs ran with headlines like, "From accused to accepted, teen genius offered spot at MIT after racist smear campaign." But back at Glenridge High, the school district scrambled. What should have been a quiet farewell, a silent shame for the institution, had become a national headline, and not the good kind. On Wednesday, the superintendent called Yvonne personally. "Dr. Carter," he began, his voice oiled with civility. "We understand DeShawn has received quite an impressive offer." "We did," she replied flatly. "We'd like to propose an alternative," he said carefully. A way forward that benefits everyone. There it was. That word. Everyone. A word that always meant everyone but you. We'd like DeShawn to consider staying. He continued. The board is prepared to expunge all prior disciplinary actions. We'd restore his honors status. Feature him in next month's school showcase. Make him a symbol of Glenridge excellence. Yvonne's silence was thunderous. Glenridge excellence? She repeated finally. You mean the same Glenridge that tried to bury him 6 months ago? He could help us rebuild community trust. The superintendent said. His story could uplift school morale, heal divisions, inspire. Inspire who? She cut in. The teachers who called him a fraud? Or the students who tagged our garage with slurs? He paused. We're trying to make amends. No, she said, voice colder now. You're trying to make yourselves look good before the media finds your next mistake. Then she hung up. But they didn't stop there. An official letter arrived 2 days later. Typed. Signed. Formal. It read, We invite DeShawn Carter to remain enrolled at Glenridge High for his senior year. We believe his continued presence would serve as a positive influence on our academic environment. In exchange, all previous records of disciplinary review will be erased. We respectfully request he delay enrollment in any alternative program until post-graduation. A deal dressed in dignity. It wasn't about his future. It was about their image. DeShawn read the letter aloud in the living room. Then silence. Yvonne waited. He finally looked up. They want me to be their redemption arc. She nodded. They want the headlines to change. They'll smile in my face while holding the knife. And hope you're too grateful to notice it. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. I'm not grateful. I'm tired. She walked over, knelt beside him, and handed him the MIT folder again. Then let's make them tired. Friday morning arrived with overcast skies, and something colder than rain hanging in the air. Glenridge High was hosting its monthly assembly, a routine gathering filled with motivational quotes, announcements, and forgettable speeches. But this time, the auditorium buzzed with whispers. Because DeShawn was on the program. Rumors had already spread. He's staying. No, he's leaving. Didn't he reject MIT? I heard he's gonna sue the school. None of it was true, and none of it mattered, because DeShawn would speak for himself. Principal Rivera introduced him with a thin smile and a microphone he barely touched. Please welcome DeShawn Carter, one of Glenridge's most decorated students, and a young man whose journey has inspired us all. Polite applause followed. DeShawn stepped up to the podium in a navy blue hoodie and black jeans. He didn't wear a blazer. He didn't need to look like them to speak his truth. He looked across the auditorium. Teachers, classmates, people who once muttered behind his back, now seated in forced politeness. He unfolded a single piece of paper. Blank. He didn't read from it. I've been asked a lot of questions this week, he began. About where I'm going, about who I represent, about whether I'm Glenridge's success story or its failure. You could have heard a pencil drop. I've been called gifted, cheater, genius, liar, hero, fraud. His voice didn't shake. But I'm not here to clear anything up. I'm here to tell the truth. He paused. The truth is Glenridge didn't build me. It tried to break me. Again and again. Whispers rippled through the crowd. And now they want me to stay. To make it easier for them to pretend this place isn't what it really is. Principal Rivera sat frozen. Face blank. I got a letter from MIT. It's real. It's mine. And I'm accepting it. Gasps. But not because Glenridge gave me permission. He looked around one last time. I'm not your redemption. I'm my own story. He stepped away from the mic. Mic still on, echoing that last sentence like gospel. As he walked off the stage, his phone buzzed with a new notification, a leaked screenshot from a private school board group chat. One line burned bright across the screen. We should have expelled him when we had the chance. The Glenridge High auditorium had never been that full before. Not during prom nominations, not for championship rallies, not even for graduation prep. This was different. It wasn't just a school assembly. It was a reckoning. Students packed every row. Teachers stood against the walls. Journalists lingered in the back, cameras rolling discreetly. On stage stood Principal Rivera, awkward in his posture, hands tight behind his back, as he welcomed the guest speaker, whose name no one could pretend not to know. Please welcome back DeShawn Carter, Rivera announced stiffly, his voice lacking conviction. He stepped aside as if creating distance might shield him from the moment that was about to come crashing down. DeShawn walked up to the mic slowly. No script. No slideshow. Just him. The same student who had been silenced, then spotlighted. A boy transformed by everything they'd done to erase him. He stood tall, his eyes scanning the room. No trembling. No nervous fidgeting. Just presence. "You've heard my name a lot lately," he said. "More than most of you ever said it out loud in the halls. But what you haven't heard is my voice."
The room tensed.
I wasn't just doubted. I was targeted, labeled, investigated. Not for being wrong, but for being right. Too fast, too often, too black. A hush fell. No more whispers. No more side glances. DeShawn's voice stayed calm, controlled. But every word cracked the silence open wider. "I got removed from advanced classes not because I cheated, but because I shattered their expectations. Expectations they were never ready to admit were racially coded." A teacher in the second row lowered her head. Another folded his arms tightly across his chest. "I was punished for being the kind of smart they didn't recognize, or didn't want to. I was told to prove myself in silence, told to wait, told to stay humble, while they searched my backpack for answers. I had already written down in my mind." Someone in the back gasped. Another student began crying quietly, the weight of their own silence catching up with them. "But let me tell you what hurts more than being doubted," he said. "It's being exceptional in a world that thinks excellence and blackness are incompatible. That every time I rise, I must have climbed something crooked." The principal shifted. Teachers looked at each other. Yvonne stood in the back of the auditorium, frozen, but her eyes burning. DeShawn raised the MIT letter in his hand. The envelope was creased now, folded, carried, clutched through days of doubt and nights of decision. "They offered to wipe my record, if I stayed. Offered to clean their mess as long as I kept my name attached to their banner. But I've seen what that banner covers up." He paused. "I'm not staying," gasps. "I'm going to MIT, not because Glenridge made me, but because Glenridge tried to break me, and failed." The crowd stirred. Some clapped, others stared. Some students pulled out phones to record. A handful of teachers began to rise from their chairs. DeShawn looked around slowly. "This school taught me one thing well. How to speak math better than I was ever allowed to speak truth. But I'm fluent now. And this is me rewriting your equation." Then he stepped back. He didn't drop the mic. He didn't need to. The auditorium erupted. Not in chaos, in clarity. Some cheered. Some cried. Some stood still, caught between guilt and awakening. But everyone felt the rupture. Something had cracked. And it wasn't DeShawn. It was the system that created him and tried to erase him in the same breath. That night, the Carter home sat quiet. DeShawn had barely spoken since the speech. Yvonne had watched it again on a news stream, while he sat on the porch, hood up, staring into the night. Then they heard it. The hiss of spray paint. By the time they rushed outside, the car was gone. But on the garage door, in dripping, uneven red letters, like blood left to dry, was one word: fraud. It sliced through the stillness like a scream.
Yvonne inhaled sharply. "My God!"
DeShawn stood still. He didn't move toward the paint. Didn't look away either. His expression was unreadable. Rage hidden beneath restraint. Fear masked by memory. But something inside him shifted. Again. Because just below the paint taped neatly to the garage handle was a white envelope. Yvonne pulled it off slowly, hands trembling. Inside, a single printed line. "You're making enemies in high places. Be careful." And in the corner of the envelope, barely visible in fading pencil, was a name neither of them expected to see. Ms. Rollins. By dawn, the vandalism on the Carter family's garage had gone viral. A neighbor posted a blurry photo to Facebook with the caption, "This is what happens when you speak up in Glenridge." Within an hour, it was shared over 20,000 times. News vans appeared before breakfast. Helicopters hovered before noon. But it wasn't the spray paint alone that ignited the fire. It was what the paint symbolized. A 16-year-old black boy had done everything right. Excelled. Endured. Exposed. And still someone tried to mark him as a liar. A fraud. Again. By Monday, Glenridge was in the national spotlight. Civil rights leaders arrived, not with platitudes but with paperwork. Lawsuits were filed. Demands were made. Media anchors repeated DeShawn's speech like gospel. Protesters surrounded the school with signs that read, "Smart enough to scare you. Fraud? Or threat to your bias. He didn't cheat, you did." The narrative shifted overnight. Parents of former Glenridge students, stepped forward with eerie consistency. Stories trickled out. Then poured. My son tested in the 99th percentile, but never got placed in honors. My daughter was discouraged from AP classes because she was too active in sports. My nephew, straight A's and a robotics champion, was told his scores weren't well-rounded enough. They all had one thing in common. They were black. A local journalist dug through 10 years of academic records. What he found ignited outrage beyond Glenridge. Glenridge High, in all its decades, had never produced a black valedictorian.
Not once.
Despite transcripts that showed multiple black students with qualifying GPAs, their names had quietly disappeared from consideration. Subjective teacher evaluations, discretionary behavioral reports, participation points, all used strategically to tilt the scale. The district had no answer, but the community did. Protests turned into marches. Alumni returned to speak out. Former teachers penned open letters. College professors condemned the systemic pattern. Students inside Glenridge began walking out mid-period, refusing to return until accountability was more than a press release. Then came the lawsuit. A civil rights coalition, representing 8 families, including Yvonne and DeShawn, filed a class action suit against the district. Allegations included discriminatory gifted placement policies, racially motivated disciplinary actions, and academic retaliation. It wasn't just about DeShawn anymore. He had become the spark, but the fire was bigger than him. Glenridge High tried to pivot, issued a new statement. We hear our community and are committed to equity. It didn't land, because 3 days later, a leaked email hit the local press. An internal message between the superintendent and the school board, sent months prior, read, "We can't let Carter's case become a precedent. If we cave once, we'll lose the structure." The structure, a word that now felt radioactive. By Friday, under public pressure and media scrutiny, Superintendent Lanning resigned. And by Monday morning, Ms. Rollins was placed on administrative leave, pending investigation into possible discriminatory conduct. Yvonne watched the local news in silence. DeShawn stood beside her, arms crossed. "She was the first person to call me brilliant," he said. "Then the first to doubt it. She saw your genius," Yvonne replied. It scared her. DeShawn didn't speak for a moment. Then, "I think it still does." But this time, the fear wasn't his to carry. That afternoon, as DeShawn checked his email, he found a message with no sender, just a subject line that read, "They're not done with you." Inside was a photo, a screenshot of a private chat thread, titled "The Glenridge Contingency Plan." The Massachusetts Institute of Technology rose like a promise out of a different kind of world. Sleek glass buildings, labs humming with innovation, a campus where possibility felt engineered into every brick. When DeShawn stepped onto it, he expected to feel weightless. But the truth was heavier than that. Freedom didn't erase fear. Opportunity didn't unwrite trauma. He arrived with brilliance. Yes, but also with bruises invisible to anyone who hadn't stood in front of a classroom where their intelligence was treated like a threat. His first week was a blur of orientation events, welcome seminars, and handshakes from professors who called him incredible before even reading his transcripts. He should have been thrilled. Instead, he kept looking over his shoulder. Not literally, but emotionally, as if excellence might come with a trapdoor beneath his feet. In Calculus 3, he solved problems faster than the graduate assistant. But every time he raised his hand, a voice inside whispered, "Don't be too loud, don't be too fast, don't be too black." He didn't trust praise. He'd been praised before, right before they tried to erase him. So he kept to himself, for a while, until he met Kiara from Chicago, mechanical engineering, black, and brilliant. Then Javier from Atlanta, Latinx, physics major, 2-time robotics national finalist. Then Mei Lin, from Detroit, neuroscience, outspoken, queer, fearless. They had all come from different cities, different high schools, but told the same story with different names. Teachers who weren't sure they fit, counselors who suggested less demanding classes, classmates who whispered affirmative action the moment they succeeded. "I thought I was alone," DeShawn told them one night. "You were never alone," Kiara said. "They just made sure you thought you were." Together they created something MIT had never offered them, a space, not a club, not an official student org with flyers and pizza, just a circle, a living room, a rooftop, wherever they could be, black, brown, brilliant, and unafraid. They called it the Unmuted Collective. Every week they gathered to tell their stories, to write, to share research, to strategize, to breathe. DeShawn brought his old Glenridge notebook to every session. Inside it, taped to the first page, was a photo of room 304, the classroom where it had all begun. Ms. Rollins' room. The board, the desk where he'd first been searched. He didn't keep it for nostalgia. He kept it as a compass. Every time I wonder why I'm here, he once told the group, I look at that picture, and I remember who I'm not supposed to be. They nodded. They all had their versions. Javier kept a rejection letter from a high school science program. Kiara wore the same hoodie she'd been called ghetto for. Milan saved her middle school report card, where a teacher had written talks too much about injustice. Months passed. DeShawn thrived academically, but still carried shadows. He had to learn to trust his professors, that questions weren't always traps, that admiration could be genuine, that his voice didn't need to shrink in order to be heard. One professor, Dr. Ramachandran, noticed his hesitance during class discussions and pulled him aside after a lecture. You already have the answers, she said. Now you need to believe they belong to you. That night he cried in the stairwell, not because of pain, but because someone finally saw his strength without being scared of it. By spring, DeShawn had published a co-authored paper in an undergraduate math journal. His TikTok tutorials, now rebranded under the unmuted name, were being used in classrooms across the country. He was invited to speak at a national STEM equity conference. Still, he never let go of Glenridge. Not out of bitterness, but because some stories have to be carried, not buried. He didn't check his Glenridge email anymore. Not after the threats, the vandalism, the silence. But one morning, an alert slipped through. Subject graduation keynote invitation. Glenridge High. DeShawn stared at it. He opened the message. It was brief, formal. We would be honored if you'd return to speak at our commencement ceremony, as an example of Glenridge excellence. Your journey has inspired many. No apology, no acknowledgement of what they'd done. Just the illusion of reconciliation. He forwarded the email to Yvonne. She replied within seconds. Do not respond yet. Then another. We need to talk. That night, DeShawn stared at the invitation on his laptop. Part of him wanted to delete it. Another part wanted to say yes. But not for them. For the students sitting in the same classrooms he once did. The ones still being told to wait their turn. To speak softly. To not outshine. I don't want to be their poster boy. He whispered aloud. I want to be their reminder. Just as he closed his laptop, another message arrived, not from Glenridge, but from a private email address. No subject line. Just one sentence. If you speak, we release everything. Attached was a zip file titled, Carter Confidential. DeShawn stared at the zip file for nearly 2 hours. He never opened it. Not because he wasn't curious, but because he already knew what it was meant to be. A muzzle. A digital threat dressed in anonymous bravado. If you speak, we release everything. Everything. He didn't know what everything meant. Maybe it was old disciplinary notes, whispers from teachers, surveillance clips taken out of context, or even fabricated dirt. He didn't care, because the more they threatened him, the more they confirmed their fear. They weren't protecting truth. They were protecting a structure that depended on boys like him staying silent. So he said yes. Glenridge High looked the same, but DeShawn didn't. He walked through the front doors on graduation day. Head high, stride steady, pain no longer chained to his ankles. The halls were just halls now, not battlegrounds. The lockers, the smell of pencil shavings, even the cracked tile outside room 304, all just scenery now. None of it had power anymore. But the whispers were still there. They invited him. He's probably just gonna talk about himself. He made the school look bad. DeShawn heard it all. He didn't flinch. He didn't need their applause. He had something bigger. The gymnasium was packed. Every row filled. Teachers in the front. Parents with programs fanned themselves. Balloons hovered. Flashbulbs blinked. Principal Rivera gave a short welcome. All corporate polish and empty smiles. Then he introduced DeShawn, a Glenridge alum, who's gone on to do remarkable things. No mention of the suspension. No mention of the hearings. Just sanitized celebration. DeShawn took the mic. He looked over the sea of faces, many familiar, most forgettable. Then his eyes landed on one row in the middle. Students in caps and gowns, brown and black and brilliant, watching him the way he once watched the world, wondering if it would ever make room. He began. I used to sit right there, he said, pointing, right in the middle. Back when I thought excellence alone would be enough. Silence. I was wrong. He didn't speak with fire. Not this time. He spoke with precision. The way he worked through equations. Slowly. Clearly. Without apology. He told them about the first time he was accused. The search. The notes. The whispers. The invisible cost of being excellent while black. He didn't name names. He didn't have to. The gym's silence wasn't tension. It was reckoning. Bias doesn't always wear a hood, he said. Sometimes it wears a lanyard. Sometimes it writes your evaluations. Sometimes it tells you to wait your turn. A few teachers shifted uncomfortably. One looked down at her lap. But here's what they don't tell you, he continued. Being underestimated is painful, but proving them wrong, that's power. The words didn't land like thunder. They landed like truth. Measured. Undeniable. He closed with a challenge. Don't shrink to fit in places that were never built for you. Take up space. Be loud with your brilliance. Make them uncomfortable, and then make them listen. Applause broke like a wave. Real. Earned. DeShawn stepped back, chest steady, heart unburdened. After the ceremony, students and parents swarmed him. Photos. Thanks. Stories of what his journey had meant to them. But then came something that stopped him mid-step. A boy, no more than 13, weaved through the crowd. Thin frame, wide eyes, dark skin. He held out a notebook, hand trembling. Mr. Carter? I'm Elijah. I saw your TikToks. You're the reason I signed up for Algebra 2 early. DeShawn smiled. Nice to meet you, Elijah. The boy opened his notebook to a page scribbled with numbers, graphs, and a partially solved equation. Can we solve one together? DeShawn looked around. Media. Faculty. Flashes. And right in front of him, the version of himself he used to be. Not the one suspended. Not the one threatened. The one who just loved numbers and needed someone to say, you belong. So he sat right there on the gym floor, crossed legs, suit and all, and walked Elijah through the problem. Step by step, not as a keynote speaker, but as a mirror. Because every story needs a sequel. As they finished solving the equation, Elijah whispered, my teacher says I ask too many questions, that I act like I know more than I do. DeShawn looked up sharply, the old pain flickering behind his eyes. Who's your teacher? He asked. Elijah hesitated, then mumbled, Ms. Rollins. She teaches middle school now. It started small, a clip, a quote, a ripple in the noise. Someone had filmed DeShawn's graduation speech from the back of the gym. Within 24 hours, it had been shared across every major platform. Within a week, it hit 2 million views. His words, being underestimated is painful, but proving them wrong is power, became a rallying cry, stitched onto TikToks, quoted in classrooms, printed on posters. What had begun as a school scandal became a movement. Journalists called it the Glenridge effect. It was no longer just about one boy and one classroom. It was about every classroom that had ever treated brilliance as a threat. A small independent film crew contacted DeShawn a year later. They wanted to tell his story, not sensationalize it, but preserve it. The documentary Room 304 premiered quietly on a streaming platform. It wasn't flashy, it was raw. Interviews with Yvonne, classmates, journalists, and even community activists built a picture that was bigger than the controversy. It was about the architecture of bias, the math of inequity. The film's final shot was simple, a close-up of DeShawn's hands solving an equation on a whiteboard, then erasing it completely. A metaphor for rewriting what the system once believed about him. The world watched, and then the world acted. Scholarships were created in his name, the Carter Initiative for Educational Equity, funded by donations from tech leaders, civil rights organizations, and alumni who saw in him the child they once were. Glenridge High was forced to overhaul its gifted and advanced placement systems. Evaluations were rewritten. External audits were mandated. Within 2 years, the honors programs that once saw almost no diversity became a reflection of the community it served. For the first time in its history, Glenridge named a black valedictorian, and during her speech she said one line that silenced the crowd. We walk through the doors he broke open. DeShawn watched the clip on his phone, tears pooling quietly in his eyes. He didn't post about it. He didn't call reporters. He just smiled and whispered, good. His life moved forward. Slowly. He finished his undergraduate degree at MIT with top honors, then earned a fellowship for mathematical research in applied logic. But instead of chasing accolades, he did something no one expected. He went home. Not to Glenridge. Not yet. But to schools like it. He traveled the country speaking to students in small towns, urban districts, underfunded schools, anywhere genius was suffocating under suspicion. He never brought cameras. He refused press coverage. "I'm not here to talk about me," he'd say. "I'm here to talk about you." He met students who hid their curiosity to avoid being called arrogant. Kids who solved problems in notebooks they never turned in. Teens told to lower their expectations for safety. He listened to them the way no one had listened to him. He gave out copies of Room 304 and small notebooks embossed with 4 words, "You belong in brilliance." He wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing fairness. But even as success bloomed around him, something in him stayed still, like a shadow that refused to leave. Late at night, when campus lights dimmed and the hum of the world grew quiet, he would open his old math notebook, the same one he carried from Glenridge, its edges frayed, its margins full of memory. Inside the front cover, taped in place, was the photo of the grainy image of that board, the one where it all began and almost ended. Every time he looked at it, he remembered the smell of dry erase ink, the way silence used to follow his answers, the metallic taste of fear when Ms. Rollins first asked to search his backpack. The past never stopped echoing, it just learned to whisper. Sometimes, when he spoke to students, he wondered if that pain had been necessary, if the boy who once doubted himself would have survived if things had gone differently. But then he'd see it, a spark in a student's eyes, the same kind of light he once dimmed to survive. And he'd think, maybe it had to happen. Not for him, but for them. Years passed. The documentary won awards. His foundation grew. He joined research teams that blended education and data analytics to identify systemic bias through algorithms. His name became synonymous with resilience. But DeShawn never chased closure, because closure, he learned, is the myth of those who were never wounded. He carried his story not as a wound, but as a warning. Still, sometimes he caught himself imagining the people he left behind. Miss Rollins. He hadn't heard from her since her resignation. No apology, no acknowledgement, just silence, the kind that felt strategic, not sorrowful. Until one winter afternoon, DeShawn was in his office at the research center when the mailroom clerk dropped off a small stack of envelopes. Most were mundane, letters, invitations, academic requests. But one stood out. It was handwritten, no return address, postmarked from Pennsylvania. The handwriting was careful, almost old-fashioned. He turned it over. Inside, a single letter, folded twice. No greeting, no signature, just words. "I watched your documentary. I thought you'd hate me forever. You should. I thought I understood fairness, but I only understood comfort. What I did wasn't protection. It was projection. I wasn't afraid you cheated. I was afraid you were everything I could never be." DeShawn froze. His breath caught. He read the lines again. Then again. The paper trembled in his hand. "I still teach, but I teach differently now. Every year I tell my students about a boy who taught me what truth sounds like when it refuses to apologize." At the bottom, scrawled faintly, almost hesitant, was a single name, Rollins. DeShawn sat back in his chair. For a long moment, he didn't move. He wasn't angry. He wasn't relieved. He just felt the strange weight of forgiveness trying to find space in a heart that wasn't sure it wanted it. That night he walked across campus to the chalkboard wall outside the main math building. A space where students could scribble anything they wanted, formulas, poems, equations, fragments of thought. He picked up a piece of chalk and wrote, slowly, "To those still doubting themselves, you are the proof." He set the chalk down and stepped back, the winter wind cutting across his face, carrying both memory and mercy. He whispered, to no one and to everyone, Room 304 was never the end. It was the beginning. As he turned to leave, a security guard called out, holding up an envelope that had just been dropped off by courier. "Hey Carter, this one's marked urgent. From Glenridge Unified District Office." Inside, one line printed in bold. "Request for consultation on bias reform. Mandatory attendance." The letter arrived in a plain envelope, no return address, just a smudged postmark from Glenridge. DeShawn wasn't expecting anything. When he flipped it over and saw the faint cursive C. Rollins, something in his chest tightened. He hadn't spoken her name out loud in over a year. He let it sit on his desk for hours. He studied the edges like it was an equation he wasn't sure he wanted to solve. When he finally opened it, the first line stopped him cold. I failed you. The words weren't styled or softened. No excuses. No warm-up. Just the truth. Raw and unflinching. As he kept reading, DeShawn felt the walls around his memory begin to tremble.
Miss Rollins wrote not as a teacher, not as a former authority figure trying to save face, but as a woman unraveling her own inherited blindness. She shared stories from her small-town childhood, how black boys were always someone else's problem, how intelligence had a color code even when no one said it aloud. I mistook your confidence for arrogance, your speed for dishonesty, she confessed. Because no one like you had ever sat in my top row and made me feel replaceable. Her words weren't just about guilt. They were about fear. Fear of being shown up by a student she was supposed to guide. Fear of facing her own inadequacy and the brilliance of someone society had told her should be behind. She admitted she had reviewed DeShawn's test records months before the accusation and knew he wasn't cheating. But when pressure came from students, parents, and quiet glances in staff meetings, she folded. I told myself I was protecting academic integrity, but I wasn't. I was protecting comfort, mine and theirs. DeShawn's jaw clenched. The letter burned in his hands like it carried every moment he'd spent trying to unlearn shame that wasn't his. Rollins explained she had retired early, not because anyone pushed her out, but because she couldn't walk back into a classroom knowing what she had done. Her silence, she wrote, was louder than any accusation. When I watched your graduation speech, I broke down, she wrote. You weren't angry. You weren't bitter. You were honest, and it ruined me in the best way. DeShawn felt something snap inside him, not in rage, but in recognition. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't try to repaint herself as a victim of the system. She simply owned her failure and let it breathe. He reread one line over and over. You didn't just teach me math, you taught me what truth sounds like when it won't apologize. The tears came quietly, without drama. They weren't for her. They were for the boy he used to be, the boy who once believed that being exceptional meant he had to shrink to survive. That night, DeShawn walked to the campus chalkboard wall, the same one where students wrote equations, poetry, or secrets in passing. He picked up a piece of chalk and wrote, "Understanding isn't forgiveness, but it's a start." He didn't reply to Ms. Rollins. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But in the silence between them, he felt something new, not closure, but peace. Not because she changed his past, but because she finally stopped denying it. He folded the letter carefully, tucked it behind the photo of room 3-4 still taped in his notebook, and whispered, "Thank you for seeing me, even if it came too late." Just as he turned off his lamp for the night, a text lit up his phone. It was from a number he didn't recognize with a single line. "They want you back at Glenridge, this time to rebuild the system you survived. If you've ever been underestimated just for being who you are, you're not alone." Stories like DeShawn's aren't rare. They're just rarely believed. Type yes if you believe brilliance shouldn't come with a penalty. Subscribe if this broke your heart and opened your eyes.